The evening had just begun at the large event hall, and the place was already filled with people dressed in their best clothes. Soft music played from the speakers, the smell of food drifted from the catering area, and the lights were warm and golden. Everyone seemed excited, busy talking, laughing, and taking photos. But in the background, quietly moving between tables and chairs, there was someone almost nobody paid attention to. Single dad who worked there as part of the cleaning and setup crew. He came in through the side door, pushing a cart filled with cleaning supplies, folded cloths, and a few tools. His clothes were simple, practical, and slightly worn from long hours of work. He didn't look like someone who belonged on the stage or in the spotlight, and he never tried to get attention anyway. His job was to keep the place running smoothly, and he took it seriously. He had learned long ago that the best workers were the ones nobody noticed. Beside the stage, sitting quietly on a chair, was his daughter. She had come with him because he had no one else to watch her that evening. She didn't mind. She liked being with her father, even when he worked. She had a small backpack with her, filled with school books, a water bottle, and a little snack. She sat with her legs crossed, pencil in hand, focusing on her homework. But every few minutes, she lifted her head and looked around the hall. Watching the people, the lights, and of course her father, he gave her a warm smile whenever their eyes met. Even though he was tired, even though his back sometimes hurt from carrying heavy things, the smile for his daughter always came naturally. She was his reason for everything. At the center of the stage stood a beautiful grand piano. It looked elegant under the lights, its polished black surface shining like glass. Most people didn't even look at it. They were too busy talking and walking around, but the dad noticed it every time he passed by. His eyes softened whenever he saw it, as if it reminded him of something far away. But he didn't go near it. He kept wiping tables, moving chairs, and picking up small things left behind by guests. His daughter also noticed the way he kept glancing toward the piano. She knew her father well. She knew what that look meant, even though he never talked much about it. She remembered seeing old videos of him playing a piano when she was very young. Those videos showed a different side of him, not tired, not stressed, not rushing from job to job, but calm, peaceful, and full of life. But those videos were old. Their life had changed after her mother left, and the piano was sold for bills. Since then, her father had not touched an instrument, not even once. Music had been a big part of him, but he had put it aside to raise his daughter alone. Still, the memory of those videos stayed with her. Sometimes she wished others could see that version of him too. The hall grew louder as more guests arrived. The dad continued working quietly, weaving through groups of people with his mop and cloth. Some guests accidentally bumped into him while walking backwards for photos, but they barely noticed. He simply stepped aside, smiled politely, and kept moving. He never expected anyone to recognize him or thank him. That wasn't why he worked. As the event went on, the organizers walked around giving instructions. "Make sure the tables near the stage stay clean," one of them said to him. "We have some important guests sitting there later." He nodded respectfully and went straight to work. He wiped each table carefully, making sure everything looked perfect. He wasn't just doing a job. He was making sure he could keep this job. He needed it. Most nights he worked until his hands felt numb, but he never complained. He knew he wasn't working just for himself, he was working for the little girl. Sitting near the stage, sometimes guests would look at him briefly, but no one really saw him. To them, he was simply the cleaner. Nothing more. But his daughter saw something different. She watched him with pride, knowing how hard he worked every single day. She knew he had dreams once, big dreams, but he had set them all aside so she could grow up safe and supported. She wished she could tell everyone in the hall who her father really was. But she stayed quiet, understanding how the world worked. There were small moments when the dad passed by the piano, and he would slow down just a little. He would look at the keys, almost like they were calling him. But then the sound of someone calling his name for work would bring him back to reality, and he moved on. He reminded himself that this wasn't the time. This wasn't his world anymore. After an hour or so, the crowd settled at the tables. The lights dimmed slightly, and the main program of the evening began. The dad took advantage of the calmer moment to check on his daughter. He walked to her and gently touched her shoulder. "Are you hungry?" he whispered. She shook her head. "I'm okay." "Did you eat?" He smiled. Later, she knew. Later usually meant not yet. But she didn't argue. She simply handed him her water bottle and told him to drink some. He did, and the moment made him feel warm inside. Even when she was young, she had a way of caring for him. A little while later, a small accident created a bit of commotion near the stage. One of the staff members carrying decorations knocked into the side of the piano by mistake. It wasn't a big crash, but it made a noticeable sound. The staff member quickly checked the outside, but he didn't know much about pianos. Feeling nervous, he looked around and asked, does anyone know how to check if this thing is okay?" The guests glanced at each other but didn't respond. Most of them had no idea how a piano worked beyond pressing a few keys. The dad stood nearby, holding a cleaning cloth in his hand. He felt a pull inside him, a familiar but long-lost connection to the instrument. He hesitated, unsure whether he should step forward. A worker touching the piano during the event? Would that look strange? Would someone scold him? Then he felt a gentle tug on his sleeve. His daughter was looking up at him with quiet encouragement in her eyes. She whispered softly, "You can check it. You know how—" Her voice wasn't loud, but it was enough. He took a slow breath and stepped closer to the staff member. "I can take a look," he said in a calm, humble tone. The staff member looked surprised. A few guests nearby raised their eyebrows, wondering if he truly knew what he was doing. To them, he was just the man who cleaned tables, but he didn't mind their looks. He approached the piano carefully, like someone greeting an old friend after many years. He gently touched the side, then pressed a few keys softly to test the sound. His daughter watched from her chair, her eyes shining with curiosity and hope. The moment his fingers touched the keys, something changed in his expression. It was small, subtle, but real. A spark of memory, a spark of passion, something he had buried long ago, but he quickly pulled his hand back, reminding himself that he was here to work, not to play. His daughter, however, leaned forward slightly and whispered again, this time with a tiny smile, "Just for a second. Play something." He looked at her, then at the piano, then at the hall full of people who weren't even paying attention. For a moment, time slowed down for him. He didn't know what would happen next, but something inside him whispered that maybe, just maybe, this moment was meant to happen, and without realizing it, his life was about to change. The hall was full of soft chatter, clinking glasses, and the faint smell of warm food. People were enjoying their evening, unaware that something unusual was about to happen. The dad stood beside the piano, his hand still resting lightly on the keys. He hadn't played anything yet, but just touching the instrument made his heart beat a little faster. Memories he had tried to bury for years slowly floated back to the surface. He took a step back, planning to walk away, but before he could, the staff member who had bumped into the piano spoke again. "Is it okay?" he asked quietly, still looking nervous. The dad nodded. "Yeah, I think it's fine." "Nothing seems damaged?" The staff member sighed in relief and moved on, happy to let the moment pass. But the dad didn't move right away. He stood there for a few seconds, staring at the piano like it was something precious he had lost. His daughter watched him closely. She could see the way his fingers twitched slightly, like they wanted to play even though his mind was telling him not to. She knew him better than anyone. She could read his emotions just by looking at his posture or the expression in his eyes. And right now, she could tell he was fighting with himself. She slowly got up from her chair and walked to the edge of the stage. She didn't say anything at first. She just looked at him with a soft expression that gently pushed him forward. Finally, she spoke in a low whisper, "If you want to, you can play. Just a little." Her words felt like a key turning inside him. Part of him wanted to listen to her so much it hurt. But the other part, the part that carried all the worry, responsibility, and exhaustion of being a single parent, kept him frozen in place. He told himself he shouldn't. This wasn't his event. These weren't his guests. He was just here to work, not to perform. He didn't want people to look at him strangely or think he was trying to get attention. He took a deep breath and gave his daughter a small smile. "Maybe another time," he whispered, but his daughter didn't give up. She stepped a little closer and gently touched his hand. "One note," she said with a tiny smile. "Just one." He looked at her. Really looked at her. She wasn't asking for a performance. She wasn't asking him to be someone he used to be. She was just inviting him to be himself for a moment. And somehow, that felt okay. He let out a soft breath and turned back to the piano. His fingers hovered above the keys. The hall was still full of people, but no one was paying attention to him. Everyone was lost in their conversations, laughing and taking photos, unaware that the man standing quietly near the stage was battling an emotional storm inside. Very slowly, he pressed a single key. Just one note. The sound was gentle, soft like a whisper. But it traveled through him in a way that surprised him. It felt like someone opened a window inside his chest, letting fresh air in. His daughter's eyes lit up. Just hearing that one note was enough for her to remember the videos of him playing when she was younger. The calm confidence he used to have, the joy in his eyes. He pressed another key, then another. Still soft, still cautious, but each note made him feel something he hadn't felt in years. A staff member carrying trays walked by and paused for a second, surprised to hear the sound. He looked at the dad, confused at first, but then he simply continued walking. To him, it was just a worker testing the piano, but the dad knew that wasn't what was happening. He was crossing a line he had built inside himself years ago. A line drawn out of pain, fear of failure, and the weight of responsibility. He remembered the day he stopped playing music. It wasn't a dramatic moment. It was simple. He had held his daughter in his arms as a baby, completely exhausted from work, and realized he couldn't chase dreams and raise a child at the same time. So he sold the piano, packed his music sheets, and took whatever jobs he could to support them. He told himself it was temporary, but time moved fast. 1 year turned into 5, then more. Life didn't slow down enough for him to return to music, but now, standing here, touching the piano again, he could feel the old version of himself trying to breathe again. His daughter spoke gently. "You still know how, don't you?" He smiled softly. "My hands remember more than I do." She sat down on the edge of the stage, quietly, like she was afraid to break the moment. The dad sat on the piano bench slowly, almost as if he needed permission from the world. The seat felt familiar. Too familiar. His body remembered the posture, the position of his legs, the distance from the keys. He lifted his hands again and let them rest on the keys. A simple chord slipped out accidentally, a warm sound that floated into the air. This time, a few people actually turned to look, confused but curious. He didn't notice them. His eyes were closed now. Not in a dramatic way, but in a peaceful one. He was no longer in the event hall. In his mind, he was back in a small room with peeling wallpaper where he first learned to play. He remembered practicing late at night, dreaming of big stages and bright lights. He remembered people telling him he had talent, that he could go far. He also remembered the night those dreams ended. But he didn't want to think about that anymore. He played another small melody. Just a few notes, soft, gentle, almost shy. More guests started turning their heads, whispering to each other. They weren't sure if someone had hired a pianist. They hadn't seen anyone on the stage earlier. The dad still didn't realize they were watching. He was lost in the feeling, letting his hands move without thinking. His daughter sat completely still, her eyes wide, her face glowing with pride. She had never heard him play in person like this, not really. She had only seen videos. This was different. This was alive. Suddenly he stopped. The moment broke. He pulled his hands back, almost embarrassed. "I should get back to work," he said quietly. His daughter frowned. "But you were doing so good." He smiled sadly. "This isn't the place for it." Before he could stand up, a woman from the event walked toward the stage, holding a glass in her hand. She looked confused at first, then curious. "Excuse me," she said politely. "Were you the one playing just now?" He stood up quickly, wiping his hands on his pants as if he had been caught doing something wrong. "Sorry," he said. "I was just checking the piano." "It sounded really nice," she said with a soft smile. "Do you play often?" He shook his head. "No, not anymore." She studied him for a moment, this quiet man in simple clothes, with tired eyes but gentle hands. "Well," she said, "it was lovely." Then she walked away. But her brief comment felt like a spark inside him. Someone had complimented his playing. It had been so long since he'd heard words like that. So long since anyone even knew he had talent. He turned to his daughter, who was secretly smiling. Not a small smile, a proud, glowing, full smile. "See?" she whispered. "People liked it." He rubbed his forehead, unsure what to feel. He wasn't used to being seen. He wasn't used to being appreciated. His whole life recently had been about blending into the background, working long hours, and trying to stay invisible. That was the safest way. That was how he protected himself, but something had changed now. A door inside him had quietly opened. A door he thought was locked forever. He looked at the piano again. One part of him wanted to walk away and pretend nothing happened. But another part, a stronger part, wanted to sit back down and play properly. Not just a few notes, not just a small melody, but a real piece of peace that came from the heart he had kept silent for so long. His daughter whispered again, as if reading his thoughts, "If you play for real, everyone will listen." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. His eyes already held the answer, and before the night ended, he would pick a path that would change everything for himself, and for the little girl who believed in him more than anyone else ever had. The hall was growing louder as the evening program moved forward, but something in the atmosphere had shifted. It wasn't obvious, not yet, but there was a quiet tension in the air, like people were waiting for something they couldn't explain. The dad felt it too, though he tried to ignore it. He stood near the stage, wiping his hands on a cloth even though they were already clean. His heart was beating a little faster than usual, and he kept glancing at the piano as if it were calling him back. His daughter watched him closely, sitting at the edge of the stage again. She didn't push him this time. She didn't say anything. She just gave him a warm, hopeful look, one that told him she believed he could do more than he thought. All his life recently had been about responsibility. He woke up early, worked long hours, rushed from one job to another, came home late, helped with homework, cooked whatever food he could afford, and collapsed into bed exhausted. Music had no place in that routine. Dreams had no space. But sitting there on the piano bench earlier had stirred something inside him, something he had forgotten how to feel. As he stood there lost in his thoughts, a small group of guests near the stage started whispering again. "Who played earlier?" One person asked. "I heard it too. It sounded really nice. But I didn't see any pianist on the schedule." Their curiosity spread quietly through the room. It wasn't loud enough to cause a commotion, but it was enough for the dad to notice glances being thrown toward the stage. His stomach tightened. The last thing he wanted was attention. He didn't feel ready. He didn't even know if he could still play properly. One small melody was one thing. A full piece was another. He turned to walk away and returned to his cleaning duties, hoping the moment would fade. But then the event's main host tapped the microphone, asking everyone to settle down. The lights dimmed slightly as the host made announcements about the next part of the program. People clapped politely and shifted in their seats. In that brief quietness, the dad walked past the piano again. His hand brushed against its surface. He paused. He looked around the hall. The tables were full. People were relaxed, focused on the host. It almost felt like the world had slowed down for him again. Then he heard a small voice behind him, gentle, warm, full of encouragement. "If you want to, you can play now. No one will stop you." His daughter's words were like a gentle push to the heart. She wasn't forcing him. She wasn't begging. She was simply giving him permission to be himself, even just for a moment. He swallowed hard. His throat felt tight. His hands trembled slightly. He didn't know why he was nervous. He wasn't performing for a competition. He wasn't being judged. He was just a father in a hall filled with strangers. Yet something inside him kept telling him that he needed to do this. He slowly sat down on the piano bench again. The seat felt steadier this time, more familiar. He placed his hands on his knees for a moment, trying to calm the storm inside him. He looked at his daughter, who gave him a slow nod. "It's okay," she whispered. He took a deep breath, then another. His hands rose above the keys. He didn't know what he was going to play. He didn't have sheet music. He didn't have a plan. His fingers simply moved on their own. Guided by years of practice, he thought he had forgotten. The first chords were soft, warm, gentle, almost like a memory trying to speak. The host continued talking into the microphone, but his voice began to fade as more people turned to look at the stage. The sound of the piano slipped through the hall like a quiet wave. Even people who had been deeply involved in their conversations stopped mid-sentence and turned around. The dad didn't notice any of it. His eyes were half closed, his mind drifting into a place he hadn't visited in years. Each note he played seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, emotional, full of feeling. His hands moved faster, more confidently. The melody grew richer, stronger. It told a story of struggle, of sleepless nights, of lost dreams, of love for his daughter, of all the silent pain he carried but never talked about. People in the hall sat frozen. Forks paused midair. Conversation stopped. Even the host lowered the microphone slowly, realizing something unusual was happening. The quiet man who had been cleaning tables minutes earlier was now sitting at the grand piano like he belonged there all along. The melody flowed beautifully, filling every corner of the room. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was pure. It was honest. And somehow, that made it even more powerful. A group of teenagers near the back stopped scrolling on their phones. A couple near the buffet stopped arguing. Even the catering staff paused to listen. The daughter sat still, her eyes shining with tears. She tried to blink away. She had always believed in her father, always known he was special. But even she didn't expect this level of emotion, this kind of presence. It was like watching him transform completely. The dad felt the emotions building inside him. Every note carried memories, some painful, some beautiful. He remembered playing for his daughter when she was a baby. He remembered practicing late at night, hoping for a chance to perform someday. He remembered losing himself in music during difficult times. He hadn't touched a piano in years. Yet here he was, playing as if he had never stopped. The room stayed silent, almost holding its breath. As the melody shifted into a softer, gentler part, people leaned forward instinctively. They didn't want to miss even a second. They didn't care that he was just a worker. They didn't care that he wasn't wearing fancy clothes or expensive shoes. All they saw was a man who could make a piano speak like a storyteller. He played for several minutes, letting the music pour out of him. Time didn't matter. The audience didn't matter. All that mattered was the feeling in his hands, the rush in his chest, the warmth in his heart. Finally, he reached the end of the piece. His fingers slowed. The last few notes were soft, delicate, like a gentle whisper. And when the final note faded into silence, the entire hall froze for a moment. No one moved. No one spoke. Then, suddenly, applause erupted, not polite clapping. Not a small reaction, a loud, powerful, stunned applause filled the hall from wall to wall. People stood up from their seats without thinking. Some clapped loudly, others covered their mouths in shock, and a few had watery eyes. The dad lifted his head slowly, confused at first. He never expected this reaction. He thought maybe a few people would notice, maybe someone would smile politely. But this wave of admiration and surprise felt overwhelming. He stood up from the bench, unsure of what to do. His daughter rushed to him and hugged him tightly around the waist, burying her face in his shirt. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. His eyes stung with emotion. For years he had been invisible. For years, people passed by him without seeing him. For years, he kept his talents hidden because life demanded sacrifice. But in that moment, every person in the hall saw him, truly saw him. Not as a cleaner, not as a background worker, not as someone blending into the walls, but as a musician. As a father. As someone extraordinary. The applause continued, echoing through the hall. People looked at him with admiration, respect, and a little disbelief. He didn't know what this moment meant for his future, but he knew one thing for sure: for the first time in a very long time, he felt alive. The applause felt endless. Every time it softened, someone in the hall clapped again, and the sound rose once more. The dad stood there frozen, his daughter holding on to him, his heart beating in a way he hadn't felt in years. He didn't know where to look. Everywhere he turned, people were smiling at him, nodding, some even wiping their eyes as if they had seen something unforgettable. He had never imagined that a simple decision, sitting at the piano again, would create a moment like this. Slowly, the applause faded into gentle murmurs as people began talking excitedly among themselves. Some guests walked closer to the stage, wanting to see him up close, but they stayed respectful, giving him and his daughter space. The dad took a deep breath and looked down at his daughter, who was still hugging him tightly. "You did it," she whispered. He smiled softly, brushing her hair back. "I only played a few notes." "No," she said firmly. "You made everyone listen." He chuckled under his breath. She was right. For once, people had listened, not because he asked them to, but because they couldn't ignore him. Something about that realization warmed his chest in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. Few event organizers approached him, their expressions filled with surprise and admiration. One of them spoke kindly. "That was unexpected and incredible. We had no idea you could play like that." He shook his head shyly. "I haven't played in years." "Well, it didn't sound like that," the organizer said with a smile. "It sounded like you never stopped." Another organizer stepped forward. "Would you consider playing again later tonight? Maybe during dessert? You don't have to if you're uncomfortable, but I think everyone would love it." The dad felt a wave of hesitation. He went back to being unsure. This event wasn't about him. He didn't want to take attention away from what the event was actually for. He didn't want to make anyone think he was trying to be something he wasn't. "I don't want to interrupt your program," he said politely. "You wouldn't be interrupting," the organizer replied. "You'd be adding something special." His daughter nodded quickly at him, eyes sparkling. "Please, just one more time?" He exhaled deeply, shaking his head with a small smile. "Let's see how the night goes," he said gently. He didn't want to promise anything, but he also didn't want to shut the door completely. The organizers respected his answer and walked off, already whispering excitedly among themselves. He started walking toward his cleaning cart, trying to return to his original duties, but people kept approaching him politely, kindly, never pushing too much. "That was beautiful," a woman said softly as she passed him. "I haven't heard something like that in a long time," an older man told him. "You belong on a stage," another whispered. Almost to herself, he didn't know what to say to all of them. He wasn't used to attention like this. For years, people hardly noticed him at all. Now, in the span of a few minutes, he had become the center of a room full of strangers. It felt surreal, almost like a dream he wasn't sure he deserved. He tried to continue working, but every few minutes someone stopped him. Eventually, one of the organizers walked up with a gentle laugh and said, "How about you take a break? Just for a bit. Let us handle the rest." He hesitated, but his daughter tugged at his shirt. "Dad, it's okay. You can rest." So he set aside his cleaning cloth and sat with her near a quiet corner of the stage. He watched the crowd, the lights, the soft reflections on the piano's glossy surface. Everything felt different now, not because the room had changed, but because he had. A door he kept closed for years was open again. His daughter leaned her head against his shoulder. "I wish Mom could see this," she whispered softly. He paused for a moment. It wasn't painful, just a quiet, distant thought. "Maybe she would have been surprised," he said gently. His daughter smiled. "I'm not surprised. I always knew." Her confidence in him was stronger than anything he felt for himself, and knowing she had watched him, believed in him, made the moment feel even more meaningful. Minutes later, while he sat thinking, the host approached him again. "We're having a short break before we continue," the host said politely. "If you feel comfortable, would you like to play one more piece during the break?" "You don't have to." The dad looked at his daughter. She didn't speak. She just gave him that small, hopeful smile again. He took a deep breath. Okay, he said quietly. Just one piece. Word spread quickly but gently. No big announcement was made. People simply began turning back toward the stage. Sensing that something special was about to happen again, he stood, walked back to the piano, and sat on the bench with a calmer heart this time. He didn't feel nervous now, just peaceful. He placed his fingers on the keys and took a breath. Then he began to play. This time, it wasn't a hesitant melody. It was rich, full, and steady. His hands moved with more confidence. The music filled the hall like warm light, wrapping around every person, every table, every corner. It wasn't loud or showy. It was emotional, simple, but powerful. People quieted instantly, the way they would when hearing something they didn't want to interrupt. The sound settled deep inside them, creating a moment that felt almost magical. Couples held hands. Children stopped fidgeting. Older guests closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. The dad's face softened as he played. He looked peaceful, almost glowing from inside. For those few minutes, the world outside the piano didn't exist. There were no bills, no late-night worries, no exhaustion. Just sound. Just feeling. Just honesty. When he finished, the room didn't react immediately. For a second, there was silence again, the precious kind of silence that follows something beautiful. Then the applause came again, rising like a wave, but this time the dad didn't look confused or overwhelmed. He simply smiled, stood up, and gave a small nod of gratitude. He felt lighter. He felt seen. He felt like a piece of himself had finally returned after the break. People continued with the event, but he had become someone they would remember. Guests came up to him afterward, offering warm words, offering encouragement, even offering contact details in case he ever wanted to play professionally again. One woman said gently, "My brother runs a small music cafe. He would love to have someone like you perform." Another man added, "You should think about teaching. You have real talent." The dad didn't know what his future held, but he knew one thing for certain: this night had changed something deep inside him. It didn't magically fix life or remove struggles, but it reminded him of who he used to be and who he could still become. When the event ended, he packed up his cleaning cart as usual. But now, people helped him instead of ignoring him. They thanked him, not just for the work he did, but for the music he shared. As he and his daughter walked out through the side door into the cool night air, she slipped her hand into his. "Will you play again?" she asked softly. He looked down at her, feeling the night breeze brush against his face. In the distance, he could still hear echoes of applause in his memory. "Yes," he said quietly. "I think I will." His daughter grinned, tightening her grip around his hand. "Good," she whispered. "You should?" They walked together under the soft streetlights, the world quiet around them. For the first time in years, the dad felt something warm and bright in his chest. Hope. Not just hope for music, but hope for a future where he didn't have to hide his talent, where he didn't have to shrink himself to fit into the background, a future where he could work hard, raise his daughter, and still let his music breathe. He didn't know how or when, but he knew that tonight was not the end. It was the beginning. And as he walked home, he felt lighter than he had in a long, long time, like a door inside him had finally opened, letting in all the light he had kept out for years.